A Werewolf Shifter Romance. Prologue. The world is screaming, not with sound, but with heat. A monstrous fire devours the forest, a living, roaring thing that consumes everything in its path. Soraya's lungs burn with every desperate breath, the smoke a choking blanket in the night. The heat sears her skin and whips her dark hair around her face as she fights a futile battle. Her powerful frame, a weapon forged for battle, is now a shield against a force she cannot defeat. A voice, as cold and detached as fate itself, echoes over the roar of the fire. They teach every wolf, from the time they are a pup, that the world is made of walls of tradition, of loyalty, and of a hatred that separates your kind from theirs. A wall, fortified by rivalry and loathing, stood between Soraya and Caspian, and she was certain it would stand forever. But a fire doesn't care for walls. Soraya's eyes, burning with defiance and a dawning dread, catch sight of the eastern horizon. The same furious glow of the fire is consuming the land that belongs to her greatest rival, Caspian. The fire is the great equalizer. It is burning away the walls of their hatred, leaving behind only the terrifying truth of their shared destruction. There is no glory in this loss. Only the dawning terror of what might rise from the ruins. A future born not of choice, but of desperation. A future bound to the very man she was born to despise. The fire is gone now, but a new kind of hell has just begun. Chapter 1. The sun rose over a land painted in shades of gray. The morning air was heavy with the scent of smoke and loss, carrying a damp and acrid cold that bit at Soraya's skin. She stood on a small hill, her gaze sweeping across a landscape she no longer recognized. Where her home once stood, there was only a skeletal framework of charred timber and a blanket of ash that stretched for miles. A profound and hollow grief, a sense of loss that had burned deeper than any flame, settled in her chest. Her hands, hanging at her sides, were clenched into fists, so tight her knuckles were white. This was not the territory she knew. It was a graveyard. The destruction was so complete it defied comprehension. Every tree, every stone, every memory was gone, reduced to a uniform layer of blackened earth. Soraya had fought the fire for hours, her powerful frame moving with a frantic, desperate energy. Now, exhaustion was a dull ache in her muscles, a constant reminder of her defeat. She felt a terrible sense of failure, a crushing weight of responsibility for a force she could not control. She was a warrior, a natural leader, yet here she was, humbled. Her defiance was a useless shield against the power of nature. She looked out at her pack, their faces mirroring her own despair. They looked to her for answers she didn't have, for a strength she was struggling to find. Across the scorched valley, another figure emerged from the smoke, moving with a confident stride despite the devastation. It was Caspian. His powerful frame, usually a testament to his alpha strength, now seemed humbled by the scale of the destruction. His eyes, fixed on the same endless ruin, were filled with a grim, weary despair. He was just as Soraya remembered, broad-shouldered and possessing a presence that commanded attention. Their eyes met across the valley, and the familiar spark of rivalry instantly ignited, a bitter flicker of the old world in the new. "This is what they get, isn't it?" Caspian's voice was low, a rumbling accusation against the morning silence. "When they refuse to listen to reason." Soraya's lips curled in a sneer. "Reason? You think this is a punishment? You're a fool, Caspian. This is a tragedy." She gestured with a sweeping hand at the devastation. "A punishment would have been if only your territory had been spared. If you had to stand on your perfect, unburned land and watch us suffer. But no, You get to have your pride burned to ash just like the rest of us." "And you would have celebrated, wouldn't you?" he shot back, his voice edged with a cold fury. "Happy to watch my pack starve in the snow, just as I would have been for you. Don't pretend you're above the hate we've shared for so long, Soraya. It's the only thing that's kept us alive." Their dialogue was sharp and hostile, cutting through the quiet morning. They were not just angry about the fire. They were angry at the loss of their rivalry, the shared grief that had blurred the lines between them. They were angry that in this moment of collective ruin, they were forced to acknowledge a shared humanity, a truth that made their hatred feel hollow and insignificant. They were two sides of the same coin, and the fire had melted them down, forcing them to see the uncomfortable reality of their shared existence. A small gathering of pack members slowly formed in the center of the devastation, drawn together by a collective need for direction. At the front of the crowd stood two elders, Logan and Carter, their faces somber and severe. They were the twin faces of desperation and resolve. Logan, Soraya's elder, was a stoic man whose wisdom was etched in the deep lines around his eyes. Carter, Caspian's elder, was a man of traditionalist beliefs. His posture was still rigid even in this moment of chaos. The elders spoke in low, measured tones. Their voices echoed across the valley. They acknowledged the grief, the loss, and the immense task of rebuilding. But then they made their shocking announcement. To ensure the survival and safety of both communities, a political alliance must be forged through an arranged marriage between Soraya and Caspian. The shock and outrage from both Soraya and Caspian were immediate and visceral. "No!" Soraya's voice roared with a sound of defiance and fury. "I will not! This is an insult to our traditions. We are warriors, not pawns in some political game. I will not sacrifice my identity for an ancient tradition. This is not the answer. It will lead to more conflict." Caspian, equally enraged, rejected the notion with cold, dismissive words. "This is folly. A lifetime of rivalry cannot be erased by a forced contract. It will lead to the destruction of both packs from within. You can't force us to be what we're not." But the elders were unmoved. Logan, a stoic force, silenced them with a single, unyielding command. "There is no other way. This is for the survival of our people." The ceremony that followed was a grim pantomime. Soraya, whose heart was filled with a defiant fire, stood before Caspian. She looked at the faces of her pack, their expressions of grief and a fragile hope, and knew that she had no choice. Caspian's hand extended to take hers was cold, his touch sending a shudder of revulsion through her. As they clasped hands, the vows were exchanged, not of love, but of necessity, of survival, of a future built on the ruins of a past they both refused to let go of.
Chapter 2. The heavy silence that had fallen upon the makeshift dwelling was more hostile than any of the arguments they had exchanged. Soraya sat on a rough-hewn bench, her back to Caspian, the flickering light of a single fire pit casting long, dancing shadows on the stone walls. Her heart still pounded with the furious defiance of the day before, a memory of the bitter taste of a vow she had not meant. Her entire being recoiled from his presence, every instinct screaming at her to flee, to reclaim the solitude she had always known as her sanctuary. But there was nowhere to go. The small, cramped space was a physical manifestation of their forced union, a prison built of necessity and desperation. Across from her, Caspian sat with a stillness that was just as dangerous as Soraya's simmering rage. He was the picture of a tormented alpha, his hands resting on his knees, his jaw clenched so tightly that a muscle in his cheek pulsed. He had not spoken since the ceremony, but his silence was a weapon, a palpable weight that pressed down on the air between them. Soraya could feel the cold fury radiating from him, the same furious energy that had once fueled their rivalry, now trapped and focused on her. She found herself, in a way she deeply resented, hyper-aware of him. The way his broad shoulders filled the space, the steady rhythm of his breathing, the faint, earthy scent of his wolf that had been so easy to hate but was now impossible to ignore. It was an unwelcome intrusion, a new kind of hell that she hadn't anticipated. Soraya rose abruptly, needing to move, to break the crushing stillness. Her footsteps echoed on the stone floor, the sound a sharp rebuke. She walked to the far corner of the room, examining a worn map of the territory with a feigned intensity that did little to calm the fire in her veins. She felt his eyes on her, a physical pressure on her back. She imagined his thoughts filled with contempt and a silent triumph that he, the alpha, had secured her, a she-wolf of a lesser pack, as a prize. She had to fight that thought, had to remind herself that he too was a victim in this, but it was a hard truth to remember when every fiber of her being screamed to tear him down, to remind him that she was no prize, but a warrior. The morning brought a reluctant reprieve. The two packs, now one in name only, gathered in a clearing to discuss the rebuilding efforts. The air was thick with tension and the ghosts of old loyalties. Soraya stood at the head of the meeting, her spine rigid, her chin held high. Beside her, Caspian's posture was equally unyielding. There were two poles, pushing against each other with invisible force. "We need a plan," Soraya said, her voice clear and strong. "We need to move quickly, to ration our food and build a defense against any rogues who might see our weakness as an opportunity." "And what of our traditions?" Elder Carter, an old wolf with a lifetime of traditionalist beliefs, spoke from the back of the crowd. "We must rebuild our homes with the same foundation. We must honor the old ways." Soraya's gaze flicked to Caspian, whose face was impassive. He was a traditionalist to his core. She knew he would agree. "The old ways are what got us here," she shot back, her voice tinged with bitterness. "They built a wall between us that left us both vulnerable. We need to build a new world, a new way." An argument erupted, a furious exchange between Soraya's pragmatic, innovative ideas and Carter's staunch traditionalism. Caspian remained silent for a long moment, watching them. Soraya expected him to side with his elder, to crush her ideas with the weight of his alpha authority. Instead, he simply watched, his gray eyes a storm of unreadable emotions. Finally, he spoke, his voice a low, commanding rumble that silenced the crowd. "Soraya is right. The old ways are gone, burned with our homes. We must build a new path." He paused, his gaze locking on hers with an intense heat. "But a new path does not mean we discard our strength. We will rebuild with our hands, together. We will share resources, but our patrols will remain separate. My pack will patrol the north, yours the south." Soraya bristled at the division, the subtle reminder of their separate allegiances. "Separate? We are one pack now, are we not?" "In name only," he replied, a flash of cold fury in his eyes. "We must earn each other's trust first if we are to survive this unholy alliance." Frustrated by his rigidity and by the feeling that he was deliberately undermining her authority, Soraya felt a surge of defiance. She walked away from the meeting, her heart pounding with a familiar rage. She gathered a group of younger wolves from both packs, a handful of spirited fighters who had been listening to her, and told them she was leading a hunt. "Our food stores are dwindling. We can't wait for an alpha to give us permission. We go now." Caspian's eyes, a furious gray, followed her as she walked away, but he did not stop her. A part of him, she knew, was furious at her insubordination, but another part, a small, quiet voice in her mind, wondered if he secretly admired her for it. The hours that followed were a testament to their different approaches to leadership. Soraya, a hunter by instinct and a warrior by nature, led her small group deep into the northern woods. She moved with a silent, deadly grace, her senses alive to every rustle of a leaf, every snap of a twig. She taught the younger wolves to track, to use the terrain to their advantage, to work as a team. She did not command them from the front. She led them from the middle, a part of the fight. When they returned with a successful bounty, their faces were filled with a raw pride and admiration that made her chest swell. Even Caspian's wolves, who had initially been wary, now looked at her with a new respect. Meanwhile, Caspian patrolled the new, vulnerable boundaries of their territory. He moved with a heavy, solitary grace, a force of nature in his own right. His patrol was not a hunt. It was a defense. He was the shield, the alpha who protected his pack from any unseen dangers. He discovered a lone rogue wolf, a mangy, snarling creature that had been trying to infiltrate their lands. In a moment of pure, unadulterated alpha fury, he engaged the rogue, a brutal, bone-cracking battle that left both of them bruised and bleeding. He did not kill the rogue. He simply showed it the boundaries, a powerful, silent warning that their new lands were not to be trifled with. When Soraya returned, triumphant from her hunt, she saw him. He was standing on a small, untouched patch of land, his shirt torn, a long, deep scratch on his arm. He looked tired, bruised, but victorious. She saw the unwavering alpha in him, the fierce, protective instinct that was the foundation of his being. She had never seen this side of him before, a side that was not about arrogance, but about a deep and profound commitment to his people. A small, unwelcome sense of grudging respect settled in her heart, a warmth she didn't want. That evening, they were in the confines of their dwelling. The air was different now, less hostile, more charged. They did not speak of their day, but the unspoken knowledge of their respective victories hung in the air between them. They were two halves of a whole, two different sides of leadership that had somehow, inexplicably, worked. "Your hunt was successful," he said, his voice a low rumble. It was not a compliment, but an observation, a simple statement of fact. "Your patrol was successful," she replied, her voice equally devoid of emotions. "You protected our territory." The word "our" hung in the air between them. It was the first time they had used it. She moved to the fire pit, stirring the embers, a need to busy her hands, to distract herself from his presence. The space was small, and in her movement, her arm brushed against his. The touch, unexpected and electric, sent a shock wave through her heart. She pulled away instantly, but the sensation lingered, a phantom heat on her skin. She glanced at him, her heart pounding with a sudden furious rhythm. His eyes were wide, a mirror of her own shock. The cold fury was gone, replaced by a storm of emotion she could not name. He, too, had felt it, the undeniable, unwelcome spark of chemistry that was far more dangerous than any rival alpha or rogue wolf.
Chapter 3. The first light of dawn cast a gray, somber sheen over the shattered land, but within the confines of the temporary dwelling, the atmosphere had shifted. The cold hostility that had defined Soraya and Caspian's every interaction had given way to a quiet, charged truce. It was not peace, not yet, but a tense, almost breathless stillness that crackled with an unspoken energy. Soraya no longer felt a desire to lash out, but a profound and unwelcome awareness of his presence. She felt the weight of his gaze, even when his eyes were fixed on the opposite wall, the steady rhythm of his breathing, the faint, earthy scent of his wolf that had been so easy to hate and was now impossible to ignore. This new intimacy, born of their forced proximity, unsettled her more than their rivalry ever had. A few days had passed in this manner, filled with the back-breaking work of reconstruction. The packs, now united in a desperate necessity, worked alongside each other, their shared grief slowly giving way to a weary resolve. Soraya and Caspian, in a silent, unspoken acknowledgement of their new reality, had fallen into a rhythm. They no longer spoke of their peril or their mutual contempt. Instead, their communication was brief, clipped, and surprisingly efficient. They worked as two halves of a whole, their movements in the cramped space of their dwelling a silent, practiced ballet of avoidance and proximity. This fragile peace, however, was short-lived. A scout, his face pale and streaked with dirt, burst into their dwelling. He was breathless, his body trembling with fear, his scent a mix of adrenaline and terror. He reported a small, aggressive pack of rogues encroaching on their territory. Taking advantage of the post-fire chaos, they were scavenging the remaining food stores, harassing the weakened patrols, and spreading a new kind of fear among the packs. "They're taking advantage of our weakness," the scout said, his voice trembling with fear. "They know we're vulnerable." The news sent a jolt of anger through Soraya. She looked at Caspian, and for the first time since the fire, they were completely in sync. Their minds, once so diametrically opposed, were now focused on a single, shared purpose: protecting their people. They decided to handle the threat themselves, to avoid further panic among their already stressed packs. They met in a secluded part of the forest, away from the watchful eyes of their people, to strategize. It was here that Soraya discovered, to her profound surprise, that her tactical mind was not so different from his. They spoke with a new kind of language, a language of strategy, an instinct that they both understood. Their dialogue was focused, professional, and tinged with a new layer of respect. "We take them by surprise," Soraya said, her finger tracing a path on a patch of dirt. "We use the ravine as a choke point. We push them into the narrow passage, then we trap them. It's a classic tactic, but it works." "And who do we put on the high ground?" Caspian asked, his eyes following her finger. "We need a sniper, someone who can pick them off from a distance." "Me," Soraya replied, her eyes meeting his with a fierce intensity. "I am the best shot in the pack. I'll take the high ground. You take the choke point." "No," Caspian said, his voice a low, commanding rumble. "I will not let you go alone. We will fight together. I will take the high ground. You take the choke point. You are too valuable to lose." The words, a testament to his respect for her skill, sent an unwelcome warmth through Soraya's veins. He was not just seeing her as a tool, but as a partner. They argued, a fierce debate that was more like a negotiation than a clash of wills, and in the end, they compromised. They would both take the high ground, a united front that would show the rogues that they were not to be trifled with. The confrontation with the rogues was a brutal, high-stakes battle. Soraya and Caspian fought side by side, a perfect, seamless unit. Their movements were synchronized. They protected each other's flanks without a second thought. Soraya, a ferocious warrior, protected Caspian's flank, while he provided a powerful, unyielding defense. They were a force to be reckoned with, a partnership of equal strength and skill. As the battle ended and the last of the rogues fled, they shared a quiet, victorious moment of profound connection. They had captured the rogue leader, a mangy, snarling creature whose eyes were filled with a cold, desperate hatred. Soraya and Caspian stood over him, their faces grim, their bodies bruised and bloody. They had won, but the victory was a hollow one. In a final act of spite, the rogue leader spat a chilling detail. He confessed that he was not the one who caused the fire. He was simply taking advantage of it. He hinted at a powerful, cunning enemy, an alpha named Lucien, who had an old grudge against both of their families. Soraya and Caspian were left stunned. The thrill of their shared victory was replaced by the cold fear of a larger, more sinister conspiracy. Their minds reeling, realizing that their problems are far from over. The terrifying knowledge of a hidden enemy and the true reason for their pack's destruction hangs in the air between them,
a new shared burden that will bind them together in a way they never anticipated.
Chapter 4. The cold, hard truth of the rogue's words hung in the air between Soraya and Caspian. A new shared burden that was heavier than the weight of their rivalry had ever been. The victory against the rogues had been a fleeting, hollow thing. It had given them a moment of exhilaration, a shared adrenaline-fueled high, but that had quickly given way to a terrifying sense of dread. They were no longer just rebuilding a home. They were now investigating a ghost, a powerful and unseen enemy with a personal grudge against both their families. Soraya's mind reeled. It was one thing to be fighting against an external threat, a rogue pack taking advantage of their vulnerability. It was another thing entirely to be fighting a hidden enemy, an alpha named Lucien who had a grudge that had been brewing for years, a grudge that had culminated in a monstrous fire that had destroyed everything they knew. She looked at Caspian, and for the first time, she saw a profound fear in his eyes, a fear that was a mirror of her own. This was not a fight he had trained for, a battle of wits and strength. This was a battle against the past, and a past she knew could be a very difficult thing to fight. "We have to find him," Soraya said, her voice low and tense. "We have to find out who this Lucien is and why he hates us so much." Caspian nodded, his gaze fixed on the scorched earth beneath his feet. "We need to go back. To the archives. To the old stories. The grudge. It has to be rooted in something." They returned to the ruins of their packs, to a place that had once been a source of wisdom and history. The archives, a series of carved stone tablets and leather-bound books, had miraculously been spared from the fire, protected by a dense rock formation. The air inside the archives, however, was filled with the acrid scent of smoke, a constant grim reminder of the destruction that had surrounded it. The archives themselves were a testament to their shared history, a quiet, solemn space where the weight of their past hung in the air like a thick, heavy blanket. The walls, once a source of bitter division, were now a shared resource, a neutral ground where their rivalry was put on hold for the sake of their packs. They spent the next few days in the archives, a place that was both their shared past and their uncertain future. Soraya, ever the pragmatic warrior, pored over the old maps, tracing the borders of their ancestral territories, her mind working with the cold, calculated intensity. She was methodical, logical, her fingers running over the faded ink of centuries-old scrolls. She was looking for patterns, for connections, for anything that could explain the monstrous fire. Caspian, a traditionalist at heart, delved into the old stories, the tales of honor and betrayal that had been passed down from generation to generation. He had always believed in the power of the old stories, a belief that had once been a source of their rivalry, but was now a source of their shared investigation. He read with an intuitive intensity, his eyes scanning the ancient text for a hint, a name, a detail that could shed light on this modern tragedy. Their work was a collaborative effort, their different skills and knowledge complementing each other in a way that was both surprising and exhilarating. Soraya's logical, analytical mind was a perfect foil for Caspian's intuitive, historical approach. They spoke with a new kind of language, a language of strategy and instinct that they both understood. Their conversations were no longer filled with thinly veiled hostility, but with a new, quiet respect. A respect born of shared hardship and mutual survival. It was a warmth that Soraya had not anticipated, a warmth that was slowly beginning to melt the cold fury that had once defined her. She found herself watching him, the way his brow furrowed in concentration, the way his hands, large and calloused, turned the delicate pages of a book. She hated that she noticed these things, that her mind, once filled with rage and defiance, was now consumed by this new, unwanted awareness. Through their research, they uncovered the truth. A centuries-old rivalry between their ancestors and Lucien's family.
The details of the grudge, buried in the old stories, were revealed. Lucien's ancestor, a powerful alpha, had been wronged by Soraya's ancestor, a fierce she-wolf who had a similar defiance and a similar thirst for power. The grudge had festered, passed down from one generation to the next, a festering wound that had never been allowed to heal. Lucien, it seemed, was the descendant of that old hatred, a rogue alpha who had finally decided to finish the fight. The revelation was a shared moment for Soraya and Caspian, a new burden they now carried together. They looked at each other, the weight of their intertwined history settling upon them. They were not just fighting for their packs. They were fighting to end a legacy of hatred that had spanned centuries, a hatred that had found a new, modern form. Their conversation in this section was deep and intimate, moving beyond the practicalities of survival to the emotional core of their shared history. "He is a ghost," Soraya said, her voice barely a whisper. "He is a ghost from our past, a ghost that wants to haunt us both." "Then we will exorcise him," Caspian replied, his eyes fixed on hers with a fierce intensity. "Together." Their words hung in the air between them, a silent promise, a shared vow that was more meaningful than any that had been spoken in the presence of the elders. They were two sides of the same coin, and the fire had melted them down, forcing them to see the uncomfortable reality of their shared existence. The investigation led them on a stakeout in a secluded part of the territory, a deep, untouched forest that had been spared from the fire. This was a crucial scene for their romantic development. Away from the prying eyes of their packs, their vulnerability was exposed. They shared a personal conversation about their past, their fears, and their dreams. It was a conversation that had nothing to do with alpha dominance or pack politics, but everything to do with who they were as people. The romantic tension which had been simmering for chapters finally boiled over. The moonlight, filtering through the dense canopy, painted a scene of soft, ethereal light. The air was cool, carrying the fresh, earthy scent of the untouched forest. They were close, their bodies a few inches apart, their breaths a shared rhythm. Soraya looked at Caspian, and for the first time, she saw profound fear in his eyes, a fear that was a mirror of her own. This was not a fight he had trained for, a battle of wits and strength. This was a battle against the past, and a past, she knew, could be a very difficult thing to fight. "I'm not the man you think I am," he whispered, his voice a low, husky rumble. "I'm not the alpha who would have watched your pack suffer. Not anymore. And I'm not the warrior who would have celebrated your loss," she replied, her voice soft, a whisper in the wind. Their first real, unforced kiss was a long, slow moment of pure, unadulterated passion. It was a kiss that spoke of regret, of a past that could have been different, and of a future that they were now building together. It was a kiss that sealed their emotional bond, a bond that was far stronger than any political contract. They returned from the stakeout changed by their shared experience. The joy of their newfound connection was shattered by a devastating discovery. A note from Lucien was left behind, inviting them to a final confrontation. The rogue knew their weakness. He knew their fear. And to prove his point, he had kidnapped a young pup, Philly. United by love, but now facing the greatest threat of their lives, they prepare for the hunt, their expressions a mix of love, fury, and determination. The pup, an innocent casualty in a war they did not ask for, was now the reason they would have to risk everything. The rogue had found their weakness, and now he was going to exploit it.
Chapter 5. The morning after the discovery was cold and unforgiving, a mirror for the grim resolve that had settled in Soraya and Caspian's hearts. The joy of their newfound connection, the warmth of their first kiss, was a memory now, overshadowed by the brutal reality of the hunt. They were no longer just an alpha and a she-wolf. They were a united front, a pack of two, on a mission to save one of their own. Philly, the innocent pup, was the reason they would have to risk everything. Soraya and Caspian moved through the forest with a silent, deadly grace. They were a single, powerful unit, their movements a seamless ballet of instinct and skill. They followed the faint trail of Lucienne, a trail that was a mix of cunning and taunting. Lucienne was not trying to hide. He was inviting them, luring them into a trap of his own making. Soraya, her heart filled with a primal fury, tracked the scent of her pack's blood on the wind, a scent that was a mix of fear and desperation. Caspian, his face a mask of grim determination, followed the physical tracks, his eyes scanning the forest floor for any sign of a struggle, a sign of a mistake that Lucienne might have made. They spoke in low, hushed tones, their words a mix of tactical strategy and personal promises. "We will find him," Soraya said, her voice a low growl. "We will find him, and we will make him pay for this." "We will," Caspian replied, his hand reaching out to squeeze hers. "But our first priority is Philly. We get him out, then we deal with Lucienne." Their love, born in the ashes of a fire, had now become a weapon, a powerful force that fueled their every move. They were no longer just fighting for survival, they were fighting for each other, for a future that they were now building together. They were fighting for the chance to be a real family, a chance that Lucienne was trying to take from them. The hunt led them deep into the northern mountains, to a secluded, dangerous location that was a perfect lair for a rogue alpha. It was a cave, hidden behind a waterfall, its entrance obscured by a thick curtain of water. The air was cold and damp, and the sound of the falling water was a constant, deafening roar. Soraya and Caspian looked at each other, their eyes locking in a moment of shared understanding. They knew this was it. This was the final confrontation. They entered the cave, their bodies moving with a silent, deadly grace. The air inside was still and cold, and the sound of the falling water was now a distant echo. The cave was lit by a single fire pit, its flickering light casting long, dancing shadows on the stone walls. In the center of the cave, tied to a wooden stake, was Philly. The pup was small, his eyes wide with fear, his body trembling with a cold that was both physical and emotional. Standing over him, a cruel smile on his face, was Lucienne. He was a formidable alpha, his powerful frame a testament to his strength, his eyes filled with a centuries-old hatred, fixed on Soraya and Caspian. "Welcome," he said, his voice a low, menacing rumble. "I've been expecting you." The dialogue between the three of them was a tense and emotional centerpiece of this section. Lucienne, filled with a centuries-old hatred, taunted them, trying to drive a wedge between them. "You've come for the pup, have you? How very noble of you. To think that an alpha and a she-wolf who were once rivals are now a team. It's a touching story, really. A story of a foolish alpha and a she-wolf who thinks she can have it all." "We are not here for a story, Lucienne," Soraya said, her voice a low growl. "We are here for the pup. We are here to end this." "End this?" Lucienne laughed, a cruel, cold sound that echoed in the cave. "You can't end what has been brewing for centuries. This is a legacy of hatred that you both have inherited, a legacy that will continue long after you both are gone." The battle began. It was a long, intense, and brutal fight, a dance of death that was a mix of pure, unadulterated alpha fury and a honed martial skill.
Soraya and Caspian fought as a single powerful unit, their movements perfectly synchronized. Soraya, a ferocious warrior, protected Caspian's flank, while he provided a powerful, unyielding defense. They were a force of nature, a testament to the truth that they were more powerful together than they were ever alone. In a harrowing moment, Lucien, with a cruel smile on his face, made a move to strike Soraya. He was not aiming to kill, but to wound, to make her suffer. Caspian, without a moment's hesitation, put his body in harm's way, taking the blow for her. The sound of the rogue's poisoned blade piercing his flesh deep into his heart was a sickening thud, a sound that would haunt Soraya's dreams for the rest of her life. The battle ended quickly. Soraya, with a blood-curdling scream of rage and grief, defeated Lucien. Her raw power and fury was a force of nature that he could not withstand. She rushed to Caspian's side, cradling his head in her lap, her hands once so filled with the fury of battle, now trembling with a profound, terrifying grief. The atmosphere in the cave shifted from intense action to a quiet, heartbreaking intimacy. The sound of the falling water was now a distant echo, a somber backdrop to a final, tragic scene. Soraya, her voice thick with sobs, looked at Caspian, her eyes filled with a love that she had once vowed never to feel. "You are my Alpha," she whispered. "You are my everything." "And you," Caspian replied, his voice a low, pained whisper, "are my she-wolf, my love." In his final moments, a final, painful confession, Soraya, her heart breaking, revealed her secret. "I am carrying your pup, Caspian. You're going to be a father." His eyes filled with a final, overwhelming love fixed on hers, a soft, warm smile on his face. He reached out, his hand now cold and trembling, gently touching her cheek with a final, tender grace. He was gone. The pack is safe, Philly is safe, but she was left to mourn her love and carry on his legacy. A new life growing inside her, a new life that would be a constant, painful reminder of the love that she had lost. The fire is gone, Lucien is gone, but the ghost of their past would haunt her. A new, tragic story with a new, tragic ending.
Epilogue. 4 years later, the land was reborn. Where once a monstrous fire had consumed everything, there now stood a vibrant green forest, teeming with life. The two packs, once rivals, were now a single, unified community, stronger and more resilient for having been forged in the crucible of tragedy. They had rebuilt their homes, their traditions, and their futures on a foundation of shared grief and a new, powerful resolve. At the heart of this new world stood Soraya, the Alpha who had once been a warrior and was now a leader forged by both love and loss. Soraya was a respected and formidable Alpha, her past defiance now a strength that made her a fierce protector of her people. She led with the quiet authority, a wisdom that was born not from tradition, but from her own painful experiences. Her leadership was a living tribute to the man she had lost, a man who had taught her that love was a greater strength than hatred. She often found herself in moments of quiet reflection, her gaze sweeping across the rebuilt territory, her heart filled with a profound and bittersweet love. Her greatest source of joy, however, was not in her leadership, but in her role as a mother. She had given birth to a son, a pup with Soraya's fierce determination and the same wise, kind eyes that had once belonged to Caspian.
He was a perfect blend of both his parents, a living legacy of the love that had transcended their tragedy. His name was Caspian, a final, beautiful testament to a love that had been stolen too soon. On this particular day, she watched her son play in the sun, his small body a blur of motion as he chased a butterfly. He was a symbol of hope, a physical manifestation of a love that had defied a legacy of hatred. Her story, though born of tragedy, had become one of hope, legacy, and enduring love. The fire had taken everything from her, but in the end, it had given her a family, a pack, and a future that was, in its own way, more beautiful than any she could have ever imagined. Thank you for listening, everyone. This story was a journey of love, loss, and the power of a legacy that lives on. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. What was your favorite moment in the story? How did you feel about Soraya's journey from a defiant warrior to a grieving mother and leader? What did you think of the ending? Do you think it was a fitting conclusion for their love story? Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. I'm already brainstorming my next story, but I'd love to hear from you. What kind of werewolf romance trope should I write next? Let me know in the comments.